Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their coffee break and got some energy going to continue for the rest of the day. So our first keynote speaker for the conference is our lead partner, Dr. Anna Palazzo. Anna is the Associate Professor in Urban Planning at Rome Mater University of Rome. She has a PhD in Town and Country Planning and a MS degree in Investigations and Restoration of Monuments. Maybe some of you are wondering why is she speaking to us about energy, but that's the core of her interest. And we've had lots of discussions about the impacts on the land and on the landscape and, and environmental resources. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Anna and presenting her presentation, Facing Energy Transition in Mediterranean Landscapes. Thank you.
Half an hour, okay.
Max.
Yes. So, thank you, Yasser. Thank you, audience. Thank you for your kind hospitality. My presentation is about the effects of energy transition in the Mediterranean landscapes. Do you hear me? Can you hear me? I have to... Maybe this one is better. Yes. Yes, it's working. Okay. Therefore, I will first summarize the main achievements and commitments of the Conference of Parties, COP21, held in Paris in 2015. I think all of you know about it. I am speaking to the students, the audience of students. I apologize for the others. Then I will stress some landscape characters all over the Mediterranean basin linked to land cover and land use, that is, to share traditions in agriculture. And in the end, after underlining the increasing importance of a landscape issue, even in the commonplace discourses, I will argue the need to couple the spatial planning approach with an environmental one, within a methodology and a possible roadmap for developing and implementing action plans tackling integrated energy planning using the renewables. So, let's come to the first issue, and as for the commitments that link all countries on common goals. The Mediterranean basin, at the crossroad of three continents, concentrates nearly 7% of population and 8% of primary energy consumption in the world. By 2040, this condition is expected to further increase under the double effect of a strong population growth, plus 105 million inhabitants compared to 2013, and economic expansion, plus 2.3% per year. In compliance with the Paris Agreement signed in December 2015, all Mediterranean countries are committed to challenging programs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as you may see. As a matter of fact, the Mediterranean countries are bound in a common destiny, since the average temperature increase between the 19th and 20th century in the Mediterranean basin is equal to 1.3 degrees Celsius compared to the global average that is around 0.85 degrees Celsius. Without any form of intervention and without respecting the Paris agreements, over the course of a century, the Mediterranean basin would undergo a transformation unmatched by any event registered by the Holocene to date. The Paris deal, as you know, is the world's first comprehensive climate agreement. The aim of the agreement is described in Article 2, enhancing the implementation of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change through a holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 Celsius degrees above pre-industrial levels and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 Celsius degrees above pre-industrial levels, recognizing that this would significantly reduce the risks and impacts of climate change. B, increasing the ability to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emissions development in a manner that does not threaten food production. C, making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards the greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilience development. Hence, renewable energy sources represent a major opportunity to reduce harmful emissions while improving energy security. Accordingly, the energy transition scenario assessed by specialized energy agencies makes a point of all forecasts, programs, and objectives based on official documents, assuming widespread use of renewables in construction, building, transportation, industry, and energy sector, electricity generation, refineries, gasworks, coal plants, etc. These assumptions are only consistent with a radical change in lifestyles all over the Mediterranean basin, compared to the conservative scenario, the business as usual scenario. The energy transition scenario for 2040 is much more demanding. It displays a significant reduction in primary energy demand, minus 30%, and final demand, minus 23%, a significant increase in the share of renewable energies, mainly solar and wind, in the energy mix, plus 27%, and a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions of nearly 38%. However, despite their inherent sustainability, renewables prove to be a major challenge to cultural and natural heritage and to the environmental balance, flora, fauna, water regimes, with often neglected trade-off effects. A special concern about such relations proves of the utmost importance in the Mediterranean basin, where culture and nature have long been at work, conveying identities shaped by knowledge, skills, and practices, embedded in a huge variety of landscape features and patterns, resulting from centuries-old dwelling and farming traditions. According to Fernand Braudel, the Mediterranean Sea runs from the first olive tree one encounters when coming from the north to the first palm groves that appear with the desert. Accordingly, the Mediterranean basin as a whole was first appraised by the Arab geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi in 1154 in his Tabula Rogeriana, a description of a world contained in the Book of the Pleasant Journeys into Faraway Lands, commissioned by King Roger II, cited by the world map you may see in this slide. In keeping with the Islamic tradition, al-Idrisi's map is oriented with the south appearing at top and north at the bottom. Though lacking images of people, animals, or plants, it contains stylized portrayals of mountains and rivers, a powerful set of allusions to landscape as we are used to think of. As you may see in the pictures below, among the cultivated land and crops, the expansion of olive growing would contribute to the long-term construction of a Mediterranean identity. For 50 years now, heritage and cultural landscapes have fully entered the administrative sphere, assuming a major role. As you may see, a number of international conventions stress the need to couple sustainable development with strong protection measures towards the characters of landscape. I only would like to stress which are the last achievements about this evolutionary path. Landscape undergoes continuous conceptual redefinition and reinterpretation. Under the influence of social, economic, and cultural factors, its understanding encompasses a variety of aspects regarding more and more directly territories and communities as a whole. the definition of landscape as life context, which is the last definition, is as you may see, very comprehensive, was launched by the European Landscape Convention signed in Florence in 2000. In the light of the European Convention, landscape adds to sustainability issues in many ways, especially when it comes to its anthropological dimension. But how did we get these assumptions? I only summarize the main achievements of the 1972 World Heritage Conventions, in which the most relevant assessment feature is that it links together in a single document the concepts of nature conservation and the preservation of cultural assets. And then I want to come to the intangible cultural heritage, which has its own definition, and I only a few words about it. The intangible cultural heritage transmitted from generation to generation is constantly recreated by communities and groups in response to their environment, their interaction with nature and their history, and provides them with a sense of identity and continuity, thus promoting respect for cultural diversity and human creativity. In this respect, I'm coming back to my previous issues of olive trees as a major character, a major feature, and to their expansion all over the Mediterranean basin, in order to stress that we have some roots, some common roots that the Intangible Cultural Heritage Convention stresses. It's sufficient to think of the fact that olive oil associated with centuries-old olive growing is an essential ingredient of a Mediterranean diet, the first dietary pattern in the world to be included in 2013 in the prestigious list of intangible cultural heritage. Such connections among food, nutritional properties, and landscapes are witnessed by a large variety of cultivars, agricultural practices, types of food chain, and market outlets. To stick to the case of central and southern Italy, there is evidence of how olive growing, even within countless variation of local cultivars, has somehow preserved the structural features of the historic landscape, even in suburbs areas, even in the sprawl in the peri-urban regions. Their persistence in land use that can even be read as a material survival of several tree specimens is a tangible sign that olive farming holds its own. In these regions, where olive groves display a large range of patterns, in recent years, ever larger areas have been conferred the protected designation of origin brand according to strict technical production policies. Local identities and economies are bound together thanks to landscape. Olive growing is widespread along the coast, on the hillsides and the foothill areas where the slopes are more protected from the cold northerly winds. Olives find their best cultivation conditions on the medium and low hills where they still have an economic importance and represent sometimes the only intensive typology of tree crop. As for the coastal hills, they are characterized by a suitable morphology, irrigated and irrigable plots mostly specialized. In the inland hills, finally, olive trees are present between 2,000, what happens? How can I come back? Sorry. I would like to come back, but I can't. I want to come back to here. Okay. For the coastal hills, they are characterized by a suitable morphology, irrigated and irrigable plots mostly specialized. In the inland hills, olive trees are present between 200 and 350 meters above sea level. Their exceptional suitability, along with a tradition strongly tied to landscape and culture, allows for best quality levels and high yields. As for Piedmont strips, finally, olive growing affects areas located between 350 and 700 meters above the sea level. In these areas, olive growing gradually loses its importance as a tree-like plant. Still, there are samples of century-old olive groves of considerable extensions. Besides a sort of suitability connected to altitude, olive landscapes depend upon the agricultural systems, land division, ownership, pruning habits, and so on. Olive tree landscapes, when in specialty crops, follow different paces according to the cultivars and planting layout. Current arrangements in regular rows enable olive growers to accommodate up to 460 plants per hectare, creating entirely new landscapes. There may also be cultivation where samples are scattered and associated with other crops. All these ingredients, as you may assess with us, are responsible for the different landscape features and patterns. Coming back to the ENEPLAN project, we deemed unavoidable to draw a main focus on the idea of landscape in our activities through a survey on landscape, namely landscape perceptions among young people involved in the Amman workshop. As a matter of fact, students from different fields make up a wide spectrum of ideas, insights, perceptions. We try to summarize some aspects which are remarkable when it comes to landscape. The answers not only reflect the field of expertise, but also peculiar attitudes and propensities. Otherwise, one could not explain such a fragmentation in the keywords within the same answer, pertaining to different levels of abstractions. Therefore, we prefer to split the descriptive aspects from the normative ones, the utilitarian from the perceptive ones. Predictably, there is greater correspondence in the identification of remarkable landscapes, symbolic landscapes, than in reporting threatened places. The risks are mainly concerned with exploitations, sprawl phenomena, industrial estates, tourism. The prevailing answers are very precise, but there are also geographical categories: mountains, coast, villages. The font size reflects the number of identical answers. Unfortunately, we have no time to deal with these topics, and instead, some more words need to be spent over suitable methodologies to deal with issues both related to spatial planning and environmental assessment when it comes to sustainable development, notably when programming energy plants with renewables. We are tackling the relevance of landscape and environmental issues within local policies at different scales. The main concern is to bridge the gap between the rationality stemming from planning culture, linked to an ends-means approach, and the one related to the evaluation approach, notably the strategic environmental assessment, in which compatibility, congruity, and consistency are at stake. You can see that they don't share rationales, tools, procedures. And how can we tackle such issue? Seemingly, the most appropriate way for doing so, for coupling such different rationales, is to outline a common path for the construction and implementation of action plans based on several milestones, allowing a good balance between certainty and flexibility, based on three conceptual steps: characterization, you may see the definition that I quote from some documents from UK: characterization, sensitivity assessment, and capacity assessment, connected to different scenarios to be assessed. This approach overcomes the idea of planning as a mere question of an a priori definition of rules, involving social awareness of the public choices. They are cultural issues. And what about a possible roadmap? I listed here some bullet points. I think we have to read from top to above. I skipped this lecture, but they are simultaneous and not only one after the other one, because the problem is that we have to come back to issues above when we are down, and so on. It is a recursive process. So we have to identify landscape units as the very first duty. Then we have to identify different predictory states related to different pressures, and then we have to identify a preferred scenario to be shared within public bodies, communities, and practitioners. And then policies and managerial tools for landscape are to be put in place, collecting major issues in order to increase environmental and social sustainability conditions. Such process can be reshaped and reformulated, if the case, in accordance with objectives to be fulfilled, following a pressure state response conceptual scheme largely adopted in the field of environmental protection. Indeed, the environmental tradition and the principles of strategic action can lead to a reduction of the gap between the culture of planning and the culture of evaluation on the basis of scenarios. Action plans are called upon to define where transformation are avoided or are allowed under conditions. The evaluation process all along the construction and comparison of different energy scenarios needs to be constructed, taking into due account ecological, economic, visual, and participatory issues. For sure, I think that concept mapping is a powerful tool to this aim. So let's go to the conclusions. We have stressed that the environmental thinking is crucial in the renewal of planning paradigms, allowing for circularity between knowledge and action. Compatibility and performance are at stake, along with conformance issues proper to the planning tradition. However, assessing landscape transformations over time is more than a quantitative operation. It implies symbolic values, perceptive aspects, personal considerations which cannot be reduced to simple logic operations. They require strong management, a capacity to put together different factors and to look for a synthesis. The point is to incorporate within regulatory frames specific recommendations, prescription and requirements about inclusions of renewals in landscape systems and landscape units. Action plans are entrusted to establishment of rules and regulations allowing any areas to be managed without missing their identity when new compatible uses are introduced. To sum up, landscape has fully entered the administrative sphere. It has come to the fore as a major matter of discussion since it carries conflict among different perceptions and values in use. The crucial issues basically refer to trade-off among form, the visible, the sensible landscape, structure, both land tenure and land management systems varying across different regions and functioning, ecological and environmental sustainability features, but also public use and leisure time purposes. So far, inadequacy in landscape protection tools against market-driven behaviors and weak connections to other policy measures show at what extent landscape stand out as a major concern in energy transition scenarios. notably in our Mediterranean context. And which is the specific lesson to be learned for our Erasmus ENEPLAN program. At this point, sustainable development paths are to be carried out in different fields of knowledge, competently dealing with extensive features, open space and landscape, and intensive features as well, ecology and environmental performance, even within urban and metropolitan governance schemes. However, current practices face growing difficulties in encompassing ever more different attitudes depending on energy professional specializations, tending to stiffen the decision paths. Consequently, policy making deals with a double risk of overlapping and liability areas. To ensure that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, the sustainability agenda must keep the pace with its ambitions, visions and insights, and stay stronger than its different souls. Definitely, alongside and beyond the skills and expertise, the success depends upon two major issues closely related: a broad and shared governance process involving public at large, the urge for flexibility in landscape planning, even when managing topics as zoning or urban real estate practices, which are hardware somehow, stemming from regulatory traditions. In conclusion, the enhancement of future professionals' capacities in addressing energy transition requirements is crucial for the years to come, and the comprehensive notion of landscape proves fruitful in dealing with innovative REST-based solutions. Thank you for your attention. I am alone.
I'm with you.
All the questions are for you.
Well, I'll give a brief. Thank you, Dr. Anna. I think Dr. Anna brings an important dimension to the idea of integrated energy and the idea of looking at landscapes not only as just, lands and mountains, but actually as places that we live in and as important cultural dimensions of our life. And when we start bringing those energy dimensions or energy planning dimensions into it, we need to look at the landscape in a bit of a different way. If you look at the Mediterranean landscapes, they've been interacting, the land's been interacting with the people for, centuries and centuries, and bringing the layer of energy which will require a lot of space in the landscape will prompt us to look at the landscape in a very different and integrated manner. So I would like to open it for questions, if we have any questions, and then, have a short discussion.
Yes, I'm happy to hear your presentation. I'm not an expert in landscape issues. That's why I always like your approach, and I feel your sensibility for landscape, and I appreciate it very much. It's something that should be included within any energy planning more and more. I think that that's probably some limitation in this approach, because sometimes I think it's much more systematic than systemic. I feel that it is based on a classification of landscape classes or categories. And maybe it misses the whole system. I was happy to see in your last slide that you mentioned flexibility, and probably that answers the question I was going to ask you. And so the question in general is based on this very pure approach to landscape. How much room, how much space there is for energy integration, for example, for the integration of renewable energy plants within our Mediterranean landscape? What do you think about that? What's your opinion?
I think that when it comes to energy planning, space matters. The planning tools, for instance, in our regions that escape from zoning, the areas where the renewables are suitable or where they are not allowed. And I think that planning has a major issue, which is planning to achieve and planning to avoid. If we escape from this opportunity to think that the space matters, we fail our goal somehow. I agree with you that we tried in a previous European research to perform such methodology. We had to skip some passages because they are really they are not flexible somehow, and the idea is not a wishful thinking, because I think that the slide with the rationals, the more abstract slides fit into this discourse. The problem is when you pass to action, when you are going to develop and implement. But in any case, the spatial planning is a major issue when it comes to recognize landscape unit, because the landscape has to be somehow like a reception frame for any transformation. The English heritage, which is as everything in England, in the UK, is very, very practical, is very pragmatic, has listed these passages, characterization, sensitivity, capacity, but in performing and in implementing, they are always adapting this camicia di forza, chemise de force, this body to reach a straight jacket. Yes. Thank you for your question.
Any other question? I have a question. So if we come and put some wind turbines in the middle of these olive landscapes, I think that's one of the big questions. I mean, if you have to actually do that, I mean, how do you perceive, or how do you see that the landscape is changing? Are there ways to integrate that? Because, you know, we've talked yesterday that, you know, the olive landscape, which is part of our culture as well, is a cultural matter rather than just an agricultural matter, and it's a way of living. So how would that transform the landscape? How would it change it?
I think they can't cohabitate. The olive tree, the olive groves, and the turbines can't be strictly linked. So far, I have seen many energy plants in Puglia, for instance, with turbines, and the landscapes affected are always without cultivation in trees, for instance. The crops are low crops. So far, I don't know if there is any case of cooperation, some cohabitation between olive growth and turbines, but I would suggest that there is only black or white. We can't have a gray measures because the rationals are very different. They can't cooperate.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I will be very controversial. 1,000 years ago, people were using already windmills, probably, I don't know. It has 1,500 years. So now is this new thing, the wind turbines. Well, it's new, it looks like fiction. But I would wonder if 300 or 400 years from now, they will consider it an heritage and say, oh, this is very nice things people used to use in 400 years ago to produce electricity. I don't know, what is your vision? Are we being so narrow, looking at things?
I think that wind turbines ask for wind. Olive trees don't want wind. They ask for sun. So there are different landscape needs and recommendations somehow, vocation, suitabilities. I agree with you that, the new landscapes need to be considered as well, because life continues. So, but not in this peculiar feature. I can be, I can escape your question.
Okay, I think we can move to the next panel. Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Riccardo, Josefina, and Antonio, and then the panel will be moderated by Flavio.